Hey guys, welcome to my channel. This is Jay from Coding with Jaybird, where I upload weekly tutorials to help build your confidence in coding. This is part 20 of my beginner series, JavaScript tutorial for beginners. If you haven't seen the rest, be sure to check them out. Today we're going to learn about form validation. Let's start coding, shall we? Here's my form validation project folder that I've opened in Visual Studio Code. I've linked it to the styles.css in the CSS folder and the main.js in the JS folder. Let's have a look at this in the browser. So I'll go live, and we can see we have a form here with a few input fields. We have a first name, a last name, and a select field, which has a few options within it. Now this is the same form that I used in last week's tutorial where I covered form events. So if you're interested in that, you can have a look at the link in the top right corner of this video. Let's continue for now. We'll start coding in our main.js. For form validation, we need to target each input field so that we can access the data that has been inputted into that field by the user. So let's go ahead and target our first name and last name. So we'll say first name input equals document.getElement by ID, and we'll target our first name input field, and we'll do the same thing for our last name. So our last name input equals document.getElement by ID, and then we're going to target our lname ID. Now, if we go back into our HTML file, we can see here what I've done is I've created these empty span tags below each input field. And the idea behind this is if the field has no information entered into it, then I'd like to have an error message populate within the span tag. So I'm going to target this ID as well as this ID of last name error message. So let's go ahead and do that next. Let fname error message, so first name error message equals document.getElement by ID, and I've called it an ID of fname-err-msg, and we'll do the same thing for our last name. And here the ID is lname-err-msg. Now we should also target our course input as well as the error message span tag that I've created for that. So let course input equal document.getElement by ID course, and lastly our error message for the course input field. And this is called course-err-msg. So now that we've targeted all of our input fields along with the span tags where we're going to display our error messages, let's go ahead and work on our form validation. So first things first, I need to target the form. So let submit form equal document.getElement by ID, and it's called my form. Now what I'd like to do is add an event listener to the submit form. So submit form dot, and we'll attach and add event listener to this. And here what we want to do is we want to listen for the submit event, and upon that event we want to run some function. And this is where the logic for our form validation will go. When a user clicks on the submit button, an event object will be received by this function. So I'm just going to call that E for simplicity. And the way I want to set up my logic for my form is I want to count the errors that occur in this form. So every time there's an error, I want to increment the error from a value of 0 to +1. And then the way I want to set it up is if there are no errors, then the form will submit. If there are errors greater than 0, then the form will not submit. So using that logic, let's set error equal to 0. And we'll set up our first if statement. We'll say if our first name input, so this first name input field here, dot value, so the value that's stored in it is an empty string, meaning the user hasn't typed anything, we want to have an error message. So we want to say first name input dot style dot border equals, and what we want to do here is we want to alert the user by making that border of this form field some kind of bright color. So let's just make it red. So we'll say 2 pixel solid red. And we also want to have an error message inside that first name error message span tag. So fname error message dot inner HTML equals, and we'll simply display, please enter your first name. And of course, we shouldn't forget that we want to increment our error. So we're going to say error plus plus, which is the same thing as saying error equals error plus 1. Okay, so we're going to get an error message. So let's test that out. If I save this and I don't enter any information and I hit submit, I'm going to some action-page.php. So why is that? Well, we haven't actually prevented the form from submitting based on our error count, so it's not going to work yet. All right, so let's continue some of our logic. So I want to say if our error is greater than 0, then we want to prevent the default behavior of our submit button. So if there are no errors, then the form will be submitted to the server side for further processing. If there are errors, we want to prevent the default behavior. Like so. So now, if I save this, and now when I click on the submit button, we're going to see our error message and the form doesn't submit. Please enter your first name. Okay, perfect. So now if I enter my first name, so let's say J, and I hit submit, we're able to go to our action, which is some-action-page.php, which you can see at the top of our form tag here. And that's the action of this form. So basically what happens is once a form submits, it goes to the server side and then further processing occurs there. All right, so let's go back and implement the rest of our logic for the form validation. So next I want to say if last name input has a value of an empty string, then I want to make that input field light up red. So last name input dot style dot border equals, and we'll follow the same style as above, 2 pixel solid red. And we want to display an error message as well, so the user knows what's wrong. And we'll say, please enter your last name. And let's not forget to increment our error count. And now we have one more input field, and that's our select field. So if course input dot value is empty, then we want to say course input dot style dot border equals, and we're going to highlight this field with a 2 pixel solid red color as well. And let's not forget our error message. And we'll let the user know, please select a course. And of course, we'll increment our error count. So let's have a look at this in the browser after saving this. If I enter no information and I hit submit, I have 3 error messages and all 3 input fields light up red. That's perfect. Let's say I enter in my first name and I hit submit. Why didn't this field go away? I've already entered some information. Let's say I've selected CSS and I hit submit. Again, this field should go away. Let's ask our debugging duck, Tim, to see what's going on. Did I do something wrong here? We've looked for an empty string, so we've looked to see if this field has no value, but we haven't checked to see if it has a value at this point. So we've just highlighted it, but now we need to remove that highlighting as well if there is a value in that input field. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll add an else statement in here. Well, the first time I hit the submit button, I hadn't entered any information. So all 3 fields lit up red and there was an error message in all 3 span tags. So I reached the bottom of this form. There was an error count of greater than 0 and the form didn't submit. Then I went back in and I added in my name and I selected CSS. Once I clicked the submit button, this logic was run once again. And this time it didn't catch this block because I have this first name field, and didn't catch this block because I have the CSS selected. So I need to create some else statements here that are going to say, okay, if that value is now set, clear the error message and clear the outline of red on the input field. So I'll say fname input.style.border equals an empty string. And I'll also grab the error message and give it an inner HTML of an empty string. And let's do the same thing for our second and third input fields. Last name input.style.border equals empty. And last name error message.inner HTML equals an empty string as well. And let's not forget our course selection. So course input.style.border has no styling, and the error message will be empty as well. Okay, and let's test it out. I'm not going to enter any information, and when I click the submit button, all 3 fields light up red. Now let's say this time I'm just going to type in Jaybird and I hit submit. Perfect. That highlighting or that outline has now disappeared, as well as our error message. And now if I type in Smith, let's say, and I click submit, the form submits and it goes to some action page.php for some server-side processing. All right, that's it for today. We've talked a little bit about form validation. Of course, there are many more input fields and different ways of validating forms, and I can't cover them all today, but I will get to them at a later tutorial. If you've enjoyed this lesson, please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button so I can make more videos for you in the weeks to come. Until next week, keep on coding.